Welcome to Simblified. This is the podcast that's very much like the Beatles song Maxwell's Silver Hammer. It's mostly strange, sometimes profound, and at the end of it, you feel like someone stonked you on the head with the eponymous silver hammer. This is a podcast like Dream Theater's sprawling epic, Octavarium. It starts weirdly, ends with a flourish, involves loads of beating around the bush, is much longer than it needs to be, and for some reason still manages to have loads of irrational fans. This is that podcast which is like the Pink Floyd masterpiece Dogs. It's made and performed by four men, all of whom think that is a masterpiece, making one heck of a political statement, but it's probably just listened to by recreational stoners. And finally, this particular episode is like any album released in 2022 because for the first time in a very, very long time, we are recording physically and not via Zoom. Joining me today are two very good friends. First up, a man who makes edits to Wikipedia like Steven Wilson makes edits to albums, more than humanly recommended and almost certainly annoying those around him in the process. It's Srikeit and
Namaskar.
Okay. And then we have a man who wants as much to do with the space of progressive rock as many fans of progressive rock want to have with Dream Theater. That is nothing at all. It's Tony Sebastian.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on Simplified for this week.
Yeah, you didn't write one for Naren.
No, I didn't because he wasn't coming. Naren, much like Roger Waters, is absent.
Yes.
Progressive rock is like a Rolling Stone, no?
Oh, you
Wow.
Okay,
That is a shockingly profound observation.
One musical reference.
and the one actress who won't feature in that, Kate Moss.
Amazing. Okay, so gentlemen, something weird is happening in the space of music since 2020. And it's not that people are somehow still making music with guitars in them. So what's happening is...
Wait, guitars are redundant now? I'm going to keep asking you
Yeah, this is actually great. This is actually great. So you can do a music thing. So rock music in general has fallen away from popular consciousness over the last few, not even years, decades.
Oh.
So there was a time when rock was huge, like I guess till the mid 90s really, when Nirvana and Pearl Jam and all were like really huge. Like these were number one, number two artists. Like they're still big, and they will sell out stadiums, but they're not like, what mainstream media is talking about. It then became pop with bands like or acts like the Backstreet Boys, Spice Girls and all that. Madonna was still relevant from the 80s. Yeah, I mean Michael Jackson also, but I'm saying like these guys were the taking over youth consciousness and all that. And then came an era, which is a very interesting era of hip hop and all that, which is kind of like a reaction to a lot of, what a lot of black people went through in the US really. And then came an era of, I guess, electronic music. And now I guess it's a strange time for music right now. And maybe this is a completely different episode by itself, but we are seeing things like from English-speaking centers really starting to take a little bit of prominence. We're seeing like the last few hits, like a lot of hits in the US are coming from Latin American markets, be it Despacito, be it, I don't know, there are just lots of, Spanish-tinged songs. Then you had the huge hit of Gangnam Style, which was about 10 years back. And, that continued to what is the K-pop phenomenon around the world.
Would your references be any more dated?
Yeah, I mean, because and also the reason for that is because music itself has stopped being huge, right? Again, this is worth another episode completely, but the fact of the matter is music itself has stopped being the cultural force that it used to be. It's been replaced by gaming, it's been replaced by TV shows and all that.
No, I'm just trying to think, who was the last sort of protagonist in an Indian movie to woo a girl with a guitar? Has to be one Gautam Vasudevan movie long ago, but probably it's fallen out of consciousness.
Wow, if that is the benchmark that you look,
I can only remember
Shah Rukh Khan with a violin.
Salman Khan with a
Salman?
Oh, that?
Shirtless.
No, Rock On was there.
Rock On was there. Rock On, Rock
For
On
what it's worth.
Rock On and its subsequent versions are
or
probably...
Rockstar also, no? Wasn't that a movie?
Yeah. So there are some of those. But they're mostly like, I don't think it's anymore. You're right. But to some extent, that's another episode altogether in some ways.
But 3 episodes.
But you can almost see like the progression where a guitar used to be a happy instrument where someone's playing that, and now like it's kind of transitioned to guitar being a melancholic instrument.
Yeah.
Where someone who's like a junkie who's playing it quietly in the corner, and he's like expressing his sadness and like melancholy of life through that guitar and whatever like that. So it's actually moved there in the Indian movie scene.
Yeah.
It's not in Bollywood specifically. I won't even say Indian movie scene.
That's true. But do you see how I took two things I have no idea about music in Bollywood and
you are a true ultra crepidarian, Tony.
But we will do another series of episodes just to deconstruct music, especially the questions we'll have, and we'll call them Tony Learns to Rock. TLTR.
TLDR.
Okay. So all this happened because I mentioned the word guitar. So what's that strange thing that's happening in the world of music right now is that, and this is specifically from 2020 onwards, is that song catalogs of older artists are being bought for like really huge amounts. And when I say
not NFTs.
And not NFTs. Yeah, a word that I hope to avoid, but it's been drinking game. So when I say song catalogs, I mean the rights to everything, right? So, publishing rights and distribution rights, licensing rights. We'll get into some details of what these things are. And these are being snapped by two companies in particular. One is called Hipgnosis and one is called Primary Wave. Hipgnosis, by the way, is a British company whose parent company is listed, and the name Hipgnosis, Hipgnosis, is actually paying tribute to a design company called Hipgnosis, which actually designed a lot of rock and metal rock album covers in the 60s and 70s. In fact, Hipgnosis' most famous work was with Pink Floyd. All the Wall albums and all that was designed by them. I'll just give you a few examples of what I'm talking about. In 2018, Primary Wave spent $50 million to acquire parts of the rights to Bob Marley's music. Concord Music Group paid Imagine Dragons a 9-figure sum. Primary Wave paid Stevie Nicks, the vocalist of the second half of Fleetwood Mac's career, $100 million. The biggest so far has been Bob Dylan's deal for $400 million with Universal Music Group. So what this basically means is Bob Dylan doesn't own his music anymore, right? Like Universal can do whatever they want with his music. They can.
No, but previously when you record an album, like who's putting in the money?
I'll tell you. I'll get into that. I'll just run through these examples. By the Bob Dylan thing, it was uncharitably described as one writer as he's now being paid $150 million per chord that he has ever used.
Oh, wow.
Okay. Then there's Neil Young to Hipgnosis. Another huge deal was Sony.
Wait, was Neil Young the guy who said something sassy about Spotify?
About Spotify, yes. Neil Young has always been slightly, out there. He even came out with his own music player because he kept saying that streaming platforms, they lower the quality and all that. So he came out with his own high resolution player. Yeah, he gave them. Again, for a person who doesn't know a lot of music.
He knows the keywords and he knows how to play the keywords.
Yeah. So even, do you know who owns the Beatles catalog right now?
Tony, I guess.
Not Tony, Sony. It's interesting because they actually it's complicated and you will never believe this. Between Sony owning it and the Beatles owning it, can you guess who owned the Beatles catalog? Or some parts of it, at least in the middle. It's a long, complicated story, so I'm simplifying it greatly.
Oh, this is basically like
the name has been mentioned before on this very podcast, this particular episode. You'll never believe this. Michael Jackson.
Why?
Michael Jackson for a while had the Beatles catalog. So Jackson actually bought for the entire catalog, he bought for $47 million back in 1985.
Wow.
And then there was some legal battle. Sony had half of this. Apple had, Apple Records.
Apple Records, yeah.
So there was a huge fight, etc. But basically now if you look at it today, Sony has essentially over a period of time paid $750 million for the Beatles catalog, and it's already worth $1 billion today. So they've already made a fair bit of money on it. And it's not just old these legacy artists.
Now actually makes sense to some extent because I've been seeing a lot of new music videos based on Beatles songs.
The Beatles songs,
and I was wondering who's making them, and now it makes sense.
So McCartney's not making money off
obviously,
it. Sony is. RHCP even like rock acts who are still relevant today. RHCP $140 million, and even relatively newer artists, David Guetta, the French EDM bro, $100 million. Last year, all these deals together, there was at least $5 billion that were being spent, and this amount is just increasing year on year. BMG, for instance, the label, has dedicated $1 billion to spend this year, including possibly a $500 million deal for acquiring all of Pink Floyd's music. So this is huge. This is something that's happening. It's something that's likely to happen. Yeah. So why do you guys think this is happening? I have the answers, but in the interest of keeping
NFTs has to do something with it.
Not necessarily NFTs particularly,
but
I
mean, the blockchain has something to do with it.
Overall,
Eventually, that's the point. But I'm assuming, to some extent, I think there is a lot of...
okay, let me put it this way. Why do you think artists are selling?
Why shouldn't you sell? Why? Is that like a cultural thing that says don't sell?
There's nothing like that. But okay, so you asked this question a little earlier, how things usually work out. So if I go to, suppose tomorrow I decide to make music a career, dear God, that should not be a thing. What ends up happening is, suppose
I would like to take a small detour over there and talk about how Chuck, when we were roommates, used to have something he called steam rock, which is what he did when we were making rice in the pressure cooker, and he would play with the whistle. That is the musical career of Deepa Gopalakrishnan, ladies and gentlemen.
There is a thread of Chuck trying to, quit corporate and be a musician.
Oh.
It's much less retweeted than his freelance thread.
Anyway, please continue.
So suppose I decide to take up a career in music tomorrow. There are various ways in 2022 how I could do that, including doing things on my own. But back in the day, a very common route to take, or the route to take, was to get signed up with a label, which is, say, I ask a Sony or BMG or whatever, or rather they ask me.
Is it analogous to like books?
Yeah,
like
in fact, it is exactly the same. So they will pay me an advance. They will take care of a lot of the headache involved in...
advance and then royalties, basically.
And, so a lot of things. So in terms of the money I get, there is an advance. Now that advance is supposed to cover my living expenses while I actually put my deliverable to them together, which is an album, which is say a set of 10 songs or 8 songs or whatever the case may be. And then I make royalties on it in the future. Now,
in perpetuity.
In perpetuity. Now, this is usually the case.
No, but what does the studio, what does the label?
Yeah, so what the label does is, now I know this seems a little like airy-fairy, but they take care of everything that is not the creative output itself, right? Now, that could be managing your career, that could be getting your album into stores,
production as well.
The production as well. They could be just be
or not maybe the production in terms of personnel, but in terms of financing it all.
Yeah.
So like the studios and the recording equipment and the instruments.
Yeah,
and everything
it's
like that.
It's a very underrated part of what a record label does, but they actually nurture your career. In fact, if anyone listening to this is actually interested, if you go back into our archives, we did a nice interview with Atul Churamani, who used to head A&R for one of the labels in India, and he was very closely related to managing Baba Segal's career, for instance. So that's a pretty nice episode in terms of what a record label can do for an artist. It might seem slightly anachronistic in this day and age where you can say, hey, I can build my career completely on social media and all that. But the fact of the matter is simply this. And many artists are actually complaining about this, but that promoting themselves has become a full-time job in itself. So a record label takes care of some of that. So traditionally speaking, a record label takes care of all this.
And what do they get in
the label? What they get is 80% of the sales in the future, typically. So
similar to books.
Yeah, it's very similar to books, and I'm guessing other art forms as well. And we'll chat a little later about whether labels are still relevant and all that in this day and age, where I can just create an album using computer and put up stuff myself, self-publish and all that.
Yeah.
Because obviously a lot of things go behind this. So why are artists and songwriters selling these days? So a lot of this comes from a few articles that I read, one of which is a nice Rolling Stone piece on this. One is tax benefits for the artist. So as you can imagine, I won't get
what a
start, right?
You're thinking about Bob Dylan selling all of his music,
and a lot of his music might actually be how to beat the man and all that.
And I was like, why are you doing it? Tax reasons.
No, so it's strange. And
imagine your CA is dictating this decision.
Yeah. So a lot of these
this is Bob Dylan, right? But when you ain't got nothing, you got nothing to lose.
That one the same.
He's got something to lose, my man.
The same Robert.
No more music to lose.
Yeah. The very same Nobel-winning Robert Zimmerman Jr. to give him his actual real Christian name once on the show.
Yeah, his real Christian name, yes.
Yeah. So there were some new tax laws that were introduced in the US. So it just meant that a lot of these legacy artists, if they sold their rights, they stood to save a crap ton of money with tax. So tax benefits is one broad thing. I'll link out the Rolling Stone article in case you want to read up more detail on exactly what kind of tax benefits and all that. But that is one. The second thing is less nefarious, is personal circumstances. Like Bob Dylan's 80, a lot of these legacy artists are pushing, whatever. So it's unlikely that they are going to be around for too much longer. So they prefer a lump sum rather than saying, okay, till
But wouldn't it get passed on to their estate anyway?
Yeah, so that's the other thing. Interesting you brought that up because the article also says that having a lump sum to split up is actually cleaner than figuring out royalties, how to split. Yeah. So all that. So
and to some extent where the Republicans have kind of, so there's something called the wealth tax, which is the inheritance tax that happens where when you're passing it to your kids, but the Republicans in the US have actually made it, have not allowed it to get passed.
Okay. So but it might eventually.
It's still there, but right now at this point it's pretty much taxed.
So why
it's a good time to die.
No, it's a good time to cash in rather on legacy. The other thing with personal circumstances, not everybody is Bob Dylan and has like such a rich catalog is going to make a lot of money. A lot of artists, even some of those who were huge back in the 80s, it's not like they're fabulously wealthy or anything.
Absolutely,
like I was like looking, okay, who are the richest songwriters and all that out there? And I saw like Paul McCartney is just $1 billion. Like you would assume, like you would assume like it would be a little more. But the thing is, like even somebody big like I don't know if either of you guys have heard of David Crosby, who used to be the vocalist of Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, CSNY. He is actually he's not struggling exactly, but he says, "Listen, I have a family to feed for, etc., etc."
No, and
so having a lump sum right now makes more sense.
And also, it's also I guess some part of like, so while Bob Dylan might have a lot of relevance over a period of time, you don't know if someone like a David Guetta, who you talked about, the man has relevance right now.
Yeah.
But like maybe say 20 years from now when music, you don't know where music's going. So it's almost taking a punt. So after a point, maybe your royalties dry up and then at that point they are holding on to nothing.
Yeah.
Here is where you actually cash out and say, I've got 100 million in the bank and that's the value of my music. That's at the peak.
That's exactly said what the last point is, which is reading the current market and their own legacies.
Correct.
So right now they have a certain bit of equity. Now might as well cash in on that.
Absolutely.
And the other thing is the market is also changing. It's not, musicians don't make money the same way or in the same amount as they did long back. So like in the 80s when say music was a cultural force that, arguably the biggest has ever been, artists would make a lot of money through actual record sales. An album meant something, which means the production of an album, the concept of the album, touring after an album, all made sense at that point of time. The dynamics of music consumption are very different today because streaming has brought in a lot of changes. Like we spoke at the beginning, music's role in popular culture itself has changed so much. One of the articles that we were talking about, Ted Gioia's 10 predictions or 12 predictions for the future of music, is that you will have a favorite song, but you will not know who the artist is. Oh, the song that played in that video game or in that TV show or something. So increasingly these things are going to happen.
But that's a little counterintuitive, no? Like if a company is obviously offering them a lump sum, they are expecting like more returns on it in the future.
Yeah, so to be very honest, a lot of people who have analyzed this whole model of buying up legacy and all that, they're still treating it like some kind of a bubble. Like they have like questions about
like,
whether the whole
the Sultanate of Qatar buying up.
Yeah, but I feel like there is, I don't know if you're going to cover that point, but there is also a sense of like, say for example, if you own all of Dylan and all of the Beatles stuff, right? And if you give it to a talented producer and stuff, and who can actually like say turn it into mashups of Beatles and music, Beatles and Dylan music, or put David Guetta in there somewhere also like that, something like that, and you create different experiences out of it. Or say for example, you have a new artist coming up, right? Whose music is complementary to something that Dylan did like way back when. And then you actually sample parts of his music and you kind of mash this artist up in some way or the other and create like hype about it using that particular point of view. So there is
a 2AB.
It's the 2AB. Wow. Tony killing it, man. 2AB. But yes, that definitely can happen. So, and also, I mean, Chuck, something that you had shared some time back about how the future of music, the article that you had shared on your Telegram group some time back, I think, where it's also talking about how there's going to be a lot of like, so for example, once as holographic and VR
Yeah.
technologies come into play more and more, and the metaverse comes into play, you might actually be able to recreate historic performances in their entirety.
Yeah.
So not just because I'm assuming they're also not just purchasing the music itself, but the image rights of the music as well. So for example, Beatles performing I Want to Hold Your Hand, and there's that iconic video of them performing it at that point of time. If you're able to recreate and create it live, and then actually say in the
Have a
metaverse,
theater experience
sell
around
out a
it.
concert
Yeah.
in the metaverse, where people are attending these concerts like they happened when they happened in when they originally did.
Like, so where technology can go, taking all these old loved things, I think is
absolutely.
I mean, and Tony brought up the point of NFTs, right? It is like inescapable that there is going to be a big.
And so there's a lot of, I think from there, and I'm assuming they're taking all of these aspects into consideration, because while an individual artist may not be able to conceptualize or execute any of these things, these companies have the potential of doing so, or partnering and staying on well beyond the life of the artist.
And that too without the artist or the, a band at the end of the day is typically a bunch of very opinionated individuals, all with their own different creative ideas and all that. Ironing over all that, having complete master ownership of everything just makes decision making a lot easier. And
what excites me the most is, like, say for example, there's a really talented singer-songwriter or a very talented artist, and they are able to isolate and put out, say for example, put a Prince solo into his song.
Sure, yeah.
Right? It's the purists will hate it.
Yeah.
But I think that would be an incredible experience in itself, right?
One of the things that this is completely unrelated to what I've written here today, but one technology that is been so rampant over the last couple of this year is DALL-E 2. The AI that takes in a text prompt and churns out an image. So one of the interesting points I read about that recently, or one of the questions that will inevitably come up in the future, is a lot of prompts are like, draw me a horse in the style of Picasso, for instance. Now, who owns that? Who owns the in the style of Picasso? Suppose tomorrow somebody takes, say, an audio version of this and says, read me the Constitution of the US like the Simblified host would. So, just saying.
Yes, why not?
Chose the US for a reason. And what if, do we feel happy about that, or do we sue them because they have taken our intellectual property, which is our unmistakable banter and trademark humor?
No, so there's something that actually some talk show hosts, I think Fallon does this, where they have song styles. So they bring some talented artists, like say, I think Christina Aguilera was there for one, or I forget who else. Some artists were there, and they sing in the style of XYZ and say, like, okay, if I'm giving you, like, sing Toxic in the style of, like, Madonna or whoever else, like whatever else there is. So you take those and you kind of, so actually that, using AI and like machine learning in some way, they can kind of like create this thing where you can say, okay, sing me the US national anthem the way David Guetta would do it.
I again like how we are using that country as our...
Yeah, no, I think that is a safe option.
Or we should just go back to Micronesia, where we belong.
And microwaves of Polynesia.
Microwaves of Polynesia, sorry.
Microwaves of Polynesia.
Oh, that's not what Micronesia is. I always assume that Micronesia is...
So anyway, the Polynesia is there, and they have one island where they just keep their microwaves.
So point is, so even before DALL-E 2, there have been AIs that have done like what a Mozart symphony today would sound like. They've created a new Beatles song and things like that. So these are all just fun experiments.
But they've never been allowed to monetize.
I'm guessing so. And those are just fun experiments to show proof of concept. But eventually these proof of concepts are going to become mainstream. Like DALL-E 2, right now, they're selling licenses for it. So now it's no longer an experiment in a lab. It's now a commercial tool. And OpenAI is a for-profit company. So eventually ideas like this, like the Prince solo, right? Are they going to sample a previous solo? In which case, neat, clean, somebody gets money for it. Just like how if I sample like hip-hop stars, when they sample an old tune, they have to pay the original artist royalty for that tune. I have a little story about Lil Nas X and 9 Inch Nails. If you don't know the story, it's a really good one. So what happens if, okay, I want a solo in the style of Prince or David Gilmour or whoever it is. Now, should there be money for that? Is that a tribute? Is that taking the qualities that David Gilmour had built up over his life and now, so he should be paid for that? So again, these are questions.
But this iteration would be the art of the artist formerly known as Prince.
Wow. Again, Tony.
No, but I'd imagine if that happened in the sense of where there was a So not just like using existing music of these artists, but if you had an AI using machine learning who actually learned the style and the nuances of that particular artist, and then created a new song, a brand new song in their image, effectively how they did. And that AI created a Prince song, then that is like the artist in AI that was based on the artist formerly known as Prince, but it's currently known as
artist.
Okay.
So why do investors want to buy them? So one, also all these reasons that you said, and it's already a reasonable proof of business concept right now, because despite rising interest rates and all that sort of thing, things like streaming, sales, licensing and all that, they still rake in a lot of money. So they're actually predicting that you can make 10 to 20x of annual net royalties by going this route. It's just a couple of examples.
So like these companies also make money of like Spotify and YouTube.
The ones who buy the catalog. So whatever money the song makes. So how do they actually make? Yeah, that's a good question actually. So any streaming revenue will go directly to them and not to the artist now. Any licensing fees, and licensing fees is actually a huge one. So if a song is used in an ad or a TV show, like for example, so many songs have now become huge because of Stranger Things, right? So all that money is going to whoever owns them. And interestingly enough, there's a Kate Bush song, Running Up That Hill, which has become super popular because of its appearance on Stranger Things. And she owns a lot of the rights. So the rights itself, there are lots of layers to them. There are publishing rights, there are master rights, there are even the sheet music rights technically. So she has very smartly...
TikTok rights, something like that.
No, those are part of streaming rights technically.
Okay.
But anyway, so there are lots of these kinds of rights, and smart artists or artists who know how to navigate business and have a sense of their career and all that, they tend to keep a lot of rights for themselves so that they make more money in the long run. Whereas a lot of artists who may be great at making music but not financially very savvy end up, giving their rights away for a pittance. Or maybe when they were early in their career, they didn't think that they would be so big, so they were happy taking a bad deal or something. Took VRS. So, there's this famous example of there's a reasonably big band called the Beach Boys, who are actually the Beatles' contemporaries, who sold away a big part of the catalog I think the father of one of the members sold away the catalog for a pittance. And that actually inspired the founder of Hipgnosis to start a company that would do right by the artists and all that. We will do proper song management, or at least that's the story that goes. So anyway, so there are licensing fees. Like for example, a few years back when Michael Jackson held the rights to the Beatles catalog, he actually licensed the song Revolution to Nike for $500,000 for use in an ad.
Nice.
So the licensing also varies depending on what it's going to be used for. Is it going to be used for an ad? Is it going to be used for a show that's going to be used many times? It can even be licensed theatrically. And here's the interesting thing about some of the licenses. So if we go, if the three of us decide to start a band today, again, something that we should most definitely not do. And if we cover any song, technically we have to, even if we don't record it, even if you're practicing in a jam room, technically it's a performance. We need to pay.
Does this happen?
No, so it's not enforced to that level.
No, but
But no, not really. So I think if it's like a really huge performance or something.
For instance, you were with Insider, right?
Yeah.
And you would have, these guys performing some covers at some points.
Yeah, no? But I don't think it's enforced to
you
that
never
degree.
Had the
at least we never had to.
So I have an incredible royalty-based story. Now there is you guys know the Tonight Show.
And when you say royalty, you mean music rights,
music
right?
royalty,
not like Rajasthan.
No. Music royalty-based story. So you guys know the Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon, right? It's a very famous, the most famous talk show. It's hosted by Johnny Carson. Then it was hosted by Jay Leno.
Yeah.
Now there's a very legendary fight between Jay Leno's understudy, when Jay Leno was supposed to be going into his twilight years, was Conan O'Brien. And Conan O'Brien was supposed to take over the Tonight Show. Now, he did take over the Tonight Show, and the ratings weren't doing as well because Jay Leno was really famous, but they were recovering. And Conan was really really good with what he was doing. But later on, what happened is Jay Leno didn't like his retirement, and he went and behind Conan O'Brien's back told those guys that I want to come back.
Okay.
And the NBC guys were really like, okay, if Jay Leno is coming back, why the hell won't we? So within and the Tonight Show was always like a big thing to be handed over from one to the other, right? So he was like almost canned, almost like midway through his first season, effectively. So he only did a few shows, Conan O'Brien. Now, here is where Conan, when he realized that he was going to get canned, he realized that, okay, so now I'm going to screw with NBC. So in his last few shows, he made it a point. Like he would hire a skeleton.
Happy birthday.
He hired a skeleton from the Smithsonian to just show on the show, because he has creative freedom, right?
Yeah.
So he can hire whatever, and he would hire ridiculous stuff from ridiculous places to put on the show. And like also then cost NBC a bunch of money for it.
Yeah.
So one of the things that he did was, in one of the episodes where Tom Hanks was there, he used the song Lovely Rita by the Beatles, which was among the highest royalty songs at the time. So he used that, and that using that song on the show, like he played the full song as a background score in the show. And when using that show, it cost NBC $500,000.
Yeah.
Wow.
So as royalty for just playing the song. So he would deliberately play all kinds of music that was super expensive. In fact, one thing he also did was he showed real-time feed of an NFL game on the show, which actually ended up costing them a lot of money for it.
Wow.
So he actually trolled NBC by doing that towards the end of his tenure.
Wow. Today he would have just signed them up for Byju's, and they would have been totally screwed. I think we should make this thing like every episode we should.
But like I just remembered your birthday episode where the happy birthday song is also
Yeah.
licensed,
I
and
almost
it
forgot
never
that,
features in any movie.
It never
or anything.
features in any
The actual
movies
one.
and all that stuff. Yeah, it was there.
Yeah,
so
till the
that was
copyright
also
ran
like
out.
heavily copyrighted, and there was also like I think it's now gone out of copyright finally, but yeah, till then it was still inside it.
So you'll never see it in a movie, which is pretty amazing.
Wow. Anyway, so this is the end of side A of this episode.
Side A.
Press eject.
2AB. So we'll have
Beautiful.
let's go to side B.
Now we'll go to side E.
Welcome back to
Side
side B of this
You realize
episode.
off late, like our breaks are not doing anything because no one's sponsoring Simplified.
It's just like theme song. I'm very disappointed. I thought at least if nobody is there, at least Byju's would put something.
I mean, not if we keep doing this. Clearly, anyway. So
We're giving them enough plugs during the episode. Why not?
Keyword stuffing.
Yeah.
Keyword stuffing.
No mention is bad mention.
Okay, so some form of copyright has actually always been around for a while. Strangely enough, music royalties and copyright and all that have actually been around since like the 1800s, 1700s and all that.
Copyright?
Yeah, copyright and all that. So
wow.
sheet music and things. But here's the thing. Because dissemination of music, mass dissemination, pretty much happened only when the radio and mass media came about.
Yeah.
Actually, one of the only ways for musicians to earn money, and I'm talking about even folks like Mozart and Bach and their ilk, the only way that they could actually make money was by selling the rights to their music, because there was no way for them to make a royalty because there was no media on media to perform.
Wouldn't they like perform on stage or something?
Yeah,
like
but
concerts.
then beyond a point, I mean,
How many?
Beethoven was already blind when he composed his music. I'm assuming he wasn't in the best of health later.
So here's a Lil Nas X story that
it's in a grey box. And
yeah,
all.
you know,
I
it's
can see a screen.
it's nice. Yeah, there's a little
a little peek behind the curtain, guys.
I would have thought you would memorize the whole thing.
This is the wild benefits you get of when we do in-person recording.
It's a nice grey box.
Yeah, thank you. When Lil Nas X wrote the hit Old Town Road, he legally purchased the beat that was used from a site called BeatStars, which is a marketplace for buying and selling beats. The problem is that, so now here's the thing, there's a little banjo opening, right? Now that's from a song by the industrial metal band 9 Inch Nails. The problem is that banjo sample cost him only $30, right? Okay. But here's the thing. The person he bought it from, which is another producer named Young Kyo, this sounds credible. He did not have the license so before he uploaded BeatStars. And I'm quoting from the site that I have taken this screenshot from, which Tony has also. And I better put that link over here, otherwise who knows who will sue me. This means that it was played millions of times without approval. In fact, it's likely that either Lil Nas X or Sony had to pay the band 9 Inch Nails a substantial sum in back royalties after the song became popular worldwide. So I thought that was a pretty interesting little story. So there are lots of,
also in a very cult Indian reference, it was basically Lil Nas X who called and said, "Can you give me some beats?"
Please edit that out, because only the two of us are going to get that reference.
That's a very cult reference.
Now I know why you mentioned your friend who was on the podcast. He was the one who did the simplified intro, right? Or was it a different person?
Oh, yes, yeah, no, the simplified theme song, you mean, Gaurav. Yeah.
Theme song.
Yeah, I mean, it's a theme song. It's a theme song. The file name is called simplified_theme.mp3. We will have Gaurav on the show soon. Okay, so now there is criticism of this entire Hipgnosis model and all that. But right now,
why is there criticism?
Yeah, because they think like
too pure. Don't.
No, it's not about the pure thing. It's about many people externally look at what companies like Hipgnosis are doing and say this is fundamentally nothing different from what record labels have done. In fact, like if that Bob Dylan deal was not with the Hipgnosis, it was with a record label company. BMG is also a record label company. So there's fundamentally, Hipgnosis calls it things like song management and all that, but fundamentally there's nothing different. Like if an artist could always have gone to their label or another label and said, take my entire rights, do whatever you want, give me a lump sum and you do whatever you want with it. So there's nothing fundamentally different.
And the other thing is, I mean, a lot of these artists are selling this, but like with the organization, with where music is going, with how music manipulation is progressing, they could totally I can totally imagine like thinking that, okay, the Beatles are going to release a new album now, or 5 new albums now, 15 new albums based on like just how their historical music patterns have been, and using machine learning, just releasing new. They could totally come up with they could invent new artists who are entirely AI, who are actually based on older artists and creating music. So that's like new revenue streams, and like that is nothing, that Beatles will have nothing to do with any of that, or Dylan.
Yeah. There are some...
Can I ask a very stupid question?
No.
How many of the Beatles are alive?
2.
Oh, okay.
I was only going to say 1, but then again,
Yes.
Phew.
Dodged a bullet there, which John Lennon didn't, by the way. Okay, let's move on very quickly. Okay. Ouch. I feel it.
YOLO, oh no.
Whoa.
YOLO, oh no.
Oh man, okay, that was a low blow even by my standards.
That was really hard.
Wow. So all this...
It's okay, I think enough time has passed.
Yeah. So all this actually leads to some...
You still didn't tell him which Beatles are alive, though.
It's okay. Paul
McCartney and Ringo Starr.
So this opens up some like larger questions. And actually, like if you see, our discussion till now has been so much on the Beatles, Pink Floyd, Prince, which are what are now called heritage acts or legacy acts and things like that. So one of the big problems in music right now, again in that article that we will link in the notes, even if we have referenced it 3 times already, is that the older big artists just keep getting bigger, making it more and more difficult for new artists to break in. So,
and I think there's also therefore it makes sense in buying this, because I think the reason for that is also that there was a time when these artists were the largest thing going on in the world for several years together. Now what happens is, if you're a sensation, you're like maximum an overnight or a couple of weeks sensation.
One Instagram story.
You're an Instagram story, you're a trend that's going on for a couple of weeks. Everyone's doing your hook step and then you're done.
Then you're done.
Right. And the thing is, to own now the true sustained legends, the true sustained legends are probably all done.
Correct. Like, basically now the money jiggle and it folds very quickly.
Yes.
Dare I say, is a throwback to 2 episodes back where we spoke about the enduring power of a good brand and all that. And that kind of like makes sense over here as well.
And now, like, we've gone past that era where those brands can be created now. So all the big brands have already been created, and now it's just a race to acquire them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the same thing is happening over here. In fact, many times when I read about some of my favorite albums, or even some of the most influential artists, many times they weren't very influential during their own life. Their actual influence gets felt only later, which is, I'm sure this is there for other forms of art as well. Like most famously Van Gogh, probably. He never saw too much money during his own life. I think there was a clip from Doctor Who or something where they time travel got Van Gogh to the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam
to
see like this is the legacy that was put out. No, not just the artwork, but this is the legacy that you created. See how many
it was a beautiful scene. It was a beautiful scene. Yeah.
Sorry for the little spoiler for those who haven't seen, but it's quite a nice scene. But yeah, that's the thing, right? Today, for example, you and I, for instance, we have the option of going and watching, say, music. We have 2 hours and we have, say, 5,000 rupees to spend. So do we want to spend that time/money seeing a new artist where we don't know how it's going to react, or do you want to see a holographic performance of Led Zeppelin or something? So, all these kind of questions the role. So basically, this is another lovely stat in that article, which is the percentage on Spotify of younger artists being streamed or the newer artists being streamed actually has been dropping year on year, right? So while they may be making up in, like, for spikes, like you said, like you have the one-hit wonders or something like that, increasingly people are listening to older and older music. It doesn't help that you have shows like Stranger Things making 80s music relevant now to a bigger audience.
Yeah.
And the older bands are fitter and they just refuse to stop. Like, you have some of the Beatles contemporaries like Rolling Stones, for example. They're still touring. Mick Jagger, the age of 80, 85, is still performing. Iron Maiden, 60, 65. You have bands from the 70s whose first album was in the 60s even, who are still around. So it's.
I also see it in so many older bands that disbanded also coming back together because they've realized
they have solo careers.
Yeah, solo careers and come back all together to like play as much because it's too lucrative to let go.
It's not just lucrative. That's the other problem also is that because we don't pay for music anymore, right? Most of the consumption, I mean, leaving all the vinyl hipsters and people like me who buy on Bandcamp, leaving this little hipster crowd aside, most music consumption these days happens for almost pittance, right?
Yeah.
Even for those who pay on Spotify, you're paying what, like $5 a month in the US or whatever it is, right? That's not a lot of money itself to go around. So while the overall pie might be increasing, what ends up happening is because streaming is, because now you don't need to be affiliated to label, etc. It just means the number of artists are more. Net, what ends up happening is you just have, I mean, because of the whole dynamics changing of streaming itself, which has changed how music has been consumed, people are buying physical music less. Physical music used to be a mainstay for the artist. Time was back in the day, things were you would record a huge album. The album would generate a lot of sales that would cover the cost of this plus this thing and all that. But these days, what has happened, especially from 2010 onwards, is that touring has become an increasingly important part of artists' revenues. So it's almost like, and this I know is a strange correlation, but it's almost like the album is just the brand campaign that they're doing, and the actual money that they make is when they go on the road and tour.
I mean, it's the classical thing about giving. I mean, you once you purchase the ticket for the gig and you get the music for free.
And the point, exactly, right. And the point I wanted to make over there was the older guys know this, and some of them still need money or they're relevant or whatever, so they're touring. So when you have like
but if you sell your music catalog, you can still perform, right?
You can still perform. Yes, I believe those.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Actually,
you can only sing new songs.
Or imagine that you have to pay
to perform your own songs.
Yeah, so there are lots of unanswered questions over here. So I tried my best to see whether there's a parallel in the book industry happening. Like, is like our Hipgnosis buying a book rights or things.
Imagine buying all of Harry Potter.
So that's the thing. Like, J.K. Rowling's been very zealous about guarding the rights and all that. Especially,
what, really?
Yeah. So she even sued a couple of people for using the term muggle somewhere. So these kind of things happen, and you will find the one-off example like this, right? Like, for example, and see, again, the parallel can be drawn to brands. Like Apple sues a lot of companies or small stores just because they have some variant of the logo or call themselves Apple or whatever the case.
Or are trying to repair their phones.
Or trying to. That's another. We should do an episode on that.
We actually have.
Anyway, so I don't know whether this parallel is there in the book industry. It almost seems like it makes sense for that to be there, but whatever. But this is broadly what it is. There is this small revolution happening in the music world, at least. It'll be interesting to see if this translates over to, say, TV, books, and maybe podcasts as well. Who knows? But the music industry is very different from where it was in its heyday. Because of the changing nature of, I mean, so many reasons, right? Changing nature of consumption, which is largely via streaming, because of music's irrelevance or rather diminishing relevance in popular culture overall. And I kind of want to say it's actually become easier for musicians to put stuff out there. It's easier than ever before to create music, which naturally means that it's just going to be a more crowded field. So when you put all these factors together,
when it's as easy to put out and as easy to access, the value goes down.
The value goes
Right.
down. Yeah.
Like the whole point about like buying that ticket and then turning up over there or buying that disc or whatever
True.
player and coming home and putting it on your this thing versus just like, I mean, right now what a lot of artists are trying to do is just
Pre-save on Spotify.
pre-save on
Yeah,
Spotify,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
A lot of artists are trying to get people to like their single is
like-
going to release like in a couple of
Okay.
days.
Yeah.
Okay.
So pre-save it. So as soon as it releases, like the song will get saved on your device and then you can play it.
Yeah.
mean,
Actually,
And I feel like that's such a cop out compared to like the lines that you'd see outside record stores in like whatever era that was there. People like trying to get their hands on the first edition of those records and versus just pre-save my single. Like,
yeah.
what?
No, I mean, and again, another thing to add to the list of episodes that we should do is just how Spotify itself has changed music. Like from, because Spotify pays per stream, or rather after 30 seconds or something or over, the average song length itself, at least the top songs, I'm not talking about genres like progressive death metal and all that, where they really don't care about anything that's below 9 minutes.
Yeah.
So like songs on average are becoming shorter. There's actually this beautiful analysis that somebody with clearly a lot of computing power and time had done, which is the chorus is becoming earlier and earlier in the song. Right? Because that hook to happen so people don't skip. In fact, this is one English band that I came across who has an entire album of 100 songs, each of which are 30 seconds.
Oh, wow.
Because they're like, Spotify will pay us only when we hit 30 seconds. So what's the point of creating anything more than that? Like 30 seconds is basically what like Pink Floyd ka Echoes ka 2 piano notes happens in that time. The other thing, because of Spotify, is the concept of an album is kind of irrelevant. I think to a lot of people outside the still traditional rock and metal scene, I don't think the concept of an album is as important.
It's about singles.
It's about singles. It's about, okay, what do you do with this one song?
Yeah.
I don't think like...
Except in Indian movies, maybe, where like...
Perhaps.
I mean,
that's a good point, though.
Even if you see people who have transitioned from the album world into the single world. So you take someone like, what's the ginger hair boy?
Ed Sheeran.
If you see Ed Sheeran, who started off with like these big ass albums and now is like living life from single to single, like Bad Habits is coming out and then Shiver is coming out and like all of these individual songs, they are the big songs rather than any of the albums anymore. So like even the large artists are now transitioning from the album world into the single world.
Yeah. And that's clearly going to change a lot of dynamics in terms of the artist's relationship with the label itself. Because before the label needed to like an entire album, there needs to be a concept. A producer used to be important because, okay, here are 10 disparate songs. How do we tie them all together? Album, the sequencing used to be important.
I think this is moving away, but even so, another interesting, because we talked about Ed Sheeran, the other interesting one was with how now, if you're looking at it, if music is now looked at it from a singles point of view, the song itself becomes that much more important and the context of the song.
The
like
context,
for example,
absolutely.
I read up about the Bad Habits song was when Ed Sheeran talked about it and it became a major hit.
Sure.
But a lot of people were like, this doesn't sound like an Ed Sheeran song. And when he gave an interview, he's like, the song was releasing when people were just coming out of the pandemic, right? So he was like, I could do a very singer-songwriter song, but people haven't partied and gone to a club in so long. So I wanted to release a club song, which coincided with the time then people were coming out. So his single was actually designed for the time of the release.
Yeah, and I think that's something that's going to happen. You're going to, like, it's no secret that artists are being forced to think about how does your song go viral, or how do you write a hook that can be easily TikTokable.
Absolutely.
And or how can it be, what's a scene that's happening, what's a trend that's happening in OTT shows right now for which this could be a license. So if you go to Shutterstock, I know it's a complete digression. If you go to Shutterstock, if you go to the For Photographers page, you will see what people are searching for right now, which should inspire you as a photographer to go out and shoot these kind of things. And I think similar kind of thing might happen in music. So it's not really about the concept of an album. It's about, hey, how can your music be used in various ways?
This is basically Uber. This is actually basically like Uber search thing. So like, so I was talking to an Uber guy and he was talking about how when they look at their app, like the areas
partners
where they have all the highest demand, those areas like light up in blue, and like everyone congregates towards those areas so that they can get more rides from there and the price is higher and stuff like that. So this is basically that equivalent, right? In some way now. Tech actually dictating what kind of
amazing
content and what kind of
we have veered far away from.
Yeah, we've gone very far.
But that's okay. That's what we do.
So
on
if you
these
want to
shows,
buy the Simblified catalog,
Yeah, we'll sell it for cheap, believe me.
No, we won't. We will hold masters.
Whatever, IVM is selling it.
Yeah.
They already own it.
Yeah, fair enough. Although we might just be before our time, and much like Van Gogh, maybe we are the podcasting Van Gogh of our times. And it'll take a time machine for us
Standing hopefully outside telephone booths waiting for Doctor Who.
So if you find one of us hanging outside a phone booth,
cut his own ear off. We chew our listeners'
other
ear off.
listeners,
Yo.
I think it's about
We inspire you to cut your ear off.
See,
There you go.
much like the average Dream Theater song, there are at least 5 points before this where we should have actually
ended this episode.
Yeah, now it's the
Also a
unnatural end of
tagline
the
for-
episode.
Also a tagline.
Yeah. Like we've passed the natural end, now we have come to the unnatural end.
Yeah, so stay safe, keep your rights with you,
Yeah.
and stay simplified.
Or sell them for a lot of money. We don't care.
Yeah, or that. Sure.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.